Hi everyone, and welcome to the University of Staffordshire's Performing Under Pressure podcast. I'm your host today, Dr. Paul Mansell, and whether you are a first-time listener or a regular listener to our show, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you. Joining me in the studio today is my colleague and regular co-host for the show, Professor Matt Slater. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hi Paul, how you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, voice is on the blink a little bit, but I'm sure powerful enough to get through today's podcast. So we're really lucky today to have in our studio the CEO of Staffordshire FA, and Staffordshire FA are one of our principal partners here at the University of Staffordshire. So a warm welcome into the studio to Adam Evans.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you in the studio, Adam. And let's get stuck straight into your career, I guess. So can you walk us through your journey? You know, how did you get to be the CEO of Staffs FA?
Well, it's a bit of a longer story. Basically, I started working for Staffordshire Football Association 24 years ago. Like I said earlier on, I've only just reflected on how long that was ago. I know I joined as a admin assistant back in 2000. That was when county FAs were changing. We were taking on more members of staff. Prior to that, it wasn't. They weren't known as professional organisations. So I was brought in to support the work that underpinned the development and the governance side of the game. I've had various positions since then. I then moved into competitions and referees. So I would support referees in the county whilst administrating the competitions. I then became county secretary before becoming operations manager, which oversaw the regulatory side of the game. And then in 2016, I was very lucky, and I'm still extremely proud to have been appointed as CEO of Staffordshire Football Association.
Fantastic, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I hope our listeners are already thinking about the way that this conversation might move today. So we're interested in picking your brains on how you perform as a CEO, because it's a really important job in a huge organisation. But equally, we're interested today in picking your brains as to how you might bring people together and get the best out of people that you are responsible for in terms of line managing. On that note, how many people would you say that you are currently responsible for in your job?
This is an area which I think people misunderstand with county FAs particularly. I think they think that there's a lot of money swilling around there is a lot of money swilling around in the game, but in the grassroots game, less so. We have minimal resources, and we have 19 paid members of staff. So I oversee that. But what we do rely on, and which is really key for our performance, is that we have 50 volunteers. So our council members, we have 50 people from the game that represent the game, that help us to make those key decisions for the game. We also have a board of directors, which is 9 members, 7 of which are independent. But again, they fall under the auspice of what we do at the Staffordshire FA.
Fantastic. Okay. And before we get deeper into these topics, really, I think it's worth pausing to try to get to know you a little bit as well. So if I ask you the question of what do you like to do in your downtime, or how do you like to relax, what would you say to that?
It'll be a key thing throughout this with me, because I love running, and that actually sets me up well within my business, my professional life as well. So I do a lot of running, probably 50-60k a week. I really enjoy it. We'll talk about what it means for me later on. Walking the dog. I always walk the dog. I live in a small rural village. I love getting out and walking my dog, Kevin, actual Kevin. I didn't actually name him myself. It was from the rescue centre, but he's a legend throughout our village. Everybody knows who Kevin is, Kev. So, reading. And I've left it till last because it's going to be obvious, but I love football as well. Yeah. So, and this is where it's key for me, and this is something I talk around with our team as well. You know, football is our life, literally our life, and it's still a massive part of it, but it's so important that we have other things going on as well, because whilst if I go up the local pub or something like that, everyone wants to talk to me about football, which is absolutely fantastic. But then it becomes all-encompassing. You don't get a break from it, so you have to do other things as well. So, getting away from it. I like other sports as well. I love cricket. I've played cricket I did play cricket for years. Keep on, I watch a lot of cricket and I watch all sports really. But yeah, it's important to have other things on away from the game itself.
Definitely. I'd love to explore that a little bit more in depth shortly on the podcast today. You're not going to escape our random question generator though, Adam. So I've shuffled the questions up and may have even added some new ones into our question bank. So please, could you pick a number between 1 to 13?
6.
Okay, question 6. So question 6, this is a new one, and it's making me laugh reading it out because it's perhaps a little bit boring on the face of it, but what is your favourite type of household job?
Right, okay. I'll probably give you a boring answer then if you're good. I really enjoy, and that's no exaggeration, I really enjoy getting up and making my bed. And I think the reason for that is I just have it in my mind then. It sets me up for the day. It's the first task done.
Yeah.
And I'm up and I'm away from my bed and I'm out and I've done it. And I know I'm going to come back to something comfortable. So I know it's a boring answer, but it is actually part of my daily routine.
There's a psychological connection and meaning, I think, there as well. It's an interesting answer, on our level. So, yeah, thank you for sharing. Co-host Professor Matt Slater, you're not going to escape giving an answer there as well. I mean, we've heard about your puddings and your love of those, but what household jobs do you enjoy?
Yeah. I love, I like gardening, so I love making compost.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be my go-to here. There's something quite grounding about it. There's something quite kind of long-term about it, and also putting it back into the soil to help things grow again in the future and planting new seeds again. I love that for sure.
It's useful, isn't it?
It is useful. Yeah. Get your hands dirty and getting out there in the summer when the sun's beaming down on you is really nice. Yeah, for sure. And we did use this. I remember in a session, we did an activity to get people to understand each other a little bit more in detail. And we asked them a series of questions. They would kind of move around the room and have a conversation about different questions. And then at the end, we threw in an additional question, which was, what's the most boring thing about yourself? To have a conversation with someone about. And then the compost thing was the thing that I came up with on my side.
In a weird way, though, I think this is interesting. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think it's interesting to get to know people a bit more. If you could give one tip about making good compost, what would that be?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I think don't be too worried about the precise details because there's a lot of kind of detail out there on brown and green mix and getting the mix right. Anything can decompose and compost. Okay. So of course don't throw anything in there, but don't be too worried about trying to get the balance of green material and brown material right. Just compost things, and over time it'll decay.
And if you were tuning in today to expect to listen to an academic conversation, don't say that the University of Staffordshire's Performing Under Pressure podcast doesn't give you variety here, but
indeed,
I was asking that from a selfish perspective.
Yeah, we do an episode on gardening if you like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, very quickly for me, it would be washing up. I think, like especially recording this in the winter now, if you've been out on the school run or something and your hands are cold, coming back having a warm soapy sink full of water, for me that would be my choice.
Nice.
Anyway, back onto the topic. So, in your role, Adam, as a CEO, you are required to perform under pressure. You are required to facilitate the performing under pressure of others. But when I say that phrase to you, performing under pressure, how would you explain or define that phrase?
I think for me, it's performing consistently well in testing situations. But I think it's all relative as well. And I think you can look at it both internally and externally. And I think internally, if we start externally, for instance, if I was going to put my job and my pressure as the same as a line to, say, emergency service, it would look externally, well, frankly, ridiculous because, we work in football and that's fantastic, but it's not, you wouldn't imagine the pressure to be the same. However, internally, I think the feeling and the emotion is probably very much the same in terms of when we're under pressure. And I think we'll use an example. We've got an apprentice scheme within the office, and we have a new apprentice starting next Monday. Now, how she will feel on the first day she'll feel that pressure, and it would probably be relative how I would feel internally to something that I'm dealing with, whether it's finance with the board or whatever it might be. So internally, I think it's very much the same feeling, but externally, I think that's where it's seen differently.
Yeah, good points. Really good points. And it made me just kind of think about how individual it is. And we've all got our own perception of the demands and the situation that we're in. And one person's struggling to deal with pressure is something that another person would thrive with potentially. And I really like how you talk about kind of the external observation of somebody looking at a situation versus how you feel internally.
And I think a lot of that is down to the professional game as well. When people look and they don't think it's pressure, they can't see it as pressure, or you're earning thousands of pounds. Yeah. We know that is performing under pressure. We know that.
Yeah.
And I think from our perspective as a governing body as well, we have different pressures. And one of the biggest pressures, we there's obviously the day-to-day stuff that we do, but the biggest thing for us is we deal with volunteers. We serve the game within Staffordshire. So for us, it's that added pressure of almost having that on your shoulders, that that people live for their football. And ultimately, they've got all week where they might be working through to aim and get to their weekend, which is going to be their football. Yeah. If we make a mistake that then prevents them from doing so, or there might be a suspension, or it might be something that we've done incorrectly, then that could ruin their week. And that brings pressures within itself. And whilst I go back to the point, we talk about emergency services, everything like that, it's a very different type of pressure. Actually, providing that support adds its own elements as well. And it's almost then, and as I talk to the team quite regularly about this, is when do you put it down? Yeah. Because people are playing football at the weekend. We will work Monday to Fridays. We know then that people are thinking, well, actually, I'm going to give a little bit more because we don't want those people to miss out on their football fix every weekend. So there's that added pressure for us.
Yeah, it's kind of 24/7, I guess, really, and it's interesting in terms of having to. You talked about your running, for example, as a way to do something different, to put things down, to rest and recover, so that you're able to bring your best self. For sure. And I also get the sense I love how you talk about you're kind of serving the game, so you need strong shoulders in a sense to be able to be there for the game. And it sounds like you're trying to create an environment and a place where people can do what they want to do within football.
Yeah, exactly. We're fortunate to, and I talk to the staff quite regularly about this, we're fortunate to work for a higher purpose. Like I've just said, we enable the game to take place effectively. We support it. There are other people involved. We're 18 people. We've got 30,000 players. We've got 1,000 referees, and we've got 10,000 volunteers. It would be impossible for us to do that alone. Yeah. But our purpose is to serve the game, and I'll sit with some of my mates who are over in the Sunday evening blues, and we're talking about that. And quite frankly, even though I'm 8 years into the CEO role now and 24 years into my Staffordshire FA career, I'm enthused to get up because we know we are serving that. We're serving the game. We are having or enabling ourselves to have such a positive impact on people in general through a game that we all love.
Sure. That's great. Yeah. Get a sense of that, because when you mentioned your answer to the random question, it wasn't just making the bed, it was getting up and making the bed. So there's getting up, there's an enthusiasm there coming through, I think, from your answer to that. Yeah. You're keen and happy to get up because you want to go to work and make a difference, it sounds like, which is cool. Let me ask you a little bit about kind of the individual ways you would deal with pressure. So are there any particular strategies or any particular ways that you try to help yourself perform under pressure, whether it's an important session or a presentation or a conversation that you'd be leading up to?
I think something I did around about 5-6 years ago made a real difference to the way my outlook towards things. I did a course which was with a company called Mindspan. They do some. They work with a lot of football clubs, and particularly Norwich City. I know they worked with at the time, and I was quite sceptical to ways of thinking, or what I thought might be the ways of thinking. And I'll be honest with you, it absolutely changed my life. And I wouldn't put I put absolute importance on this as to the way I think about things, because that was it. The mantra was, think about the way you think. And what it did was, there were a number of things that I thought I understood. It actually validated it for me. It was talking about the thought circle, how your attitude will affect your behavior, your emotions and your behaviours, and also your outcomes. And I was looking at things then, taking things in, and actually every situation I was coming across was thinking, well, actually that applies to that applies to this. And I alluded to it earlier on, but where it really validated for me is my running. So there's so much that, and I always think it's it replicates life, running. I really do, genuinely. I've always said this to my daughters when I'm trying to get them into run, when I'm trying to get them to park run, and they go, yeah, Dad, yeah, it replicates life. I know what you're saying, but they don't. But as you get older, you realise, the tough times, that you have the tough times when you're running. You get through them, and the finish line is always there. So you're going to get through it, and it's the process that gets you to your outcome. So for me, it was that validation around it, and that now I know for a fact that every time I feel under pressure or I'm making a decision, I try and slow the process down. Why am I thinking like this? Okay, can I intervene with anything and understand the way I'm thinking? And that has been the most important thing for me. What we talk about this quite a lot now at Staffordshire FA, and again, we've got a lot of younger people that work for us, and it's like the typical thing when you reach your early 50s, you think, well, if I'd have known this when I was earlier on, then I would have been able to. And so now I try and pass it on to everybody. And they pretend, or at least they seem to be receptive to it. But I do hear them talking about things later. So if I could just drop those little things in anywhere. But that has helped me significantly. And I think everything else has led on from that. I think if I was looking at my actual role now, I think it's really important, and I know you're talking specifically about me, but I'm talking about my role as CEO. It's having the right people around me as well. That makes a massive difference to how I perform. I've got a solid senior management team now that I've worked with, most of them for nearly 20 years now. And we have fresh faces coming. We don't just close off, by the way. But ultimately, that has been a real. I have the ultimate trust, and they back me up, and they challenge, and they give me everything I need in every decision. And for me, the key as well is being able to, like I've said with my mindset before, is slow down and try and give yourself time to think things over. I know it's not always possible, but I really think that thinking time is really important, and I try and actually factor that into my day now. I was talking to somebody, we were talking about leadership, and he said to me, if you're not getting an hour in just of thinking time, then you're not doing your job correctly. And it really resonated with me. And whilst I'm not just sat there looking out the window, I like to have time, whether it's if I go for a run, there's that thinking time. But those are when you need that time to think about how you're going to drive things forward with us, and face up to those difficult challenges.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that. But we've got a budding psychologist in the studio, I think, because there's lots of great content in there and ideas, and it sounded really profound, quite reflective. It sounded, in terms of this was a moment you started to kind of think about how you thought in certain situations, and that had a big impact on emotions and behaviours. So I loved how you talked about how you're trying to spread that wisdom as well, and I'm sure it is being taken on board by your team as well, trying to nudge them in that kind of right way. I can't
understate how much of an impact that had. It's even what you've just mentioned, emotion. Then it's in a different term, but I now, I used to, when I first started the role, I'll be honest with you, and I think everybody has this. I had what I realise now was imposter syndrome. And I really struggled with it, to be honest. I used to think, well, there's so much experience, and I've spoken already about 30,000 players, 10,000 volunteers. And you think, well, what can I bring that's going to make such a difference here? Or, I was working with people who'd been in the game for so long, and it was that confidence to actually say, well, what can I bring that's going to make a difference? And I think that was a big part of me growing out of that as well. It was I learned during that course that, it's okay to be emotive when you speak.
Mm-hmm.
Before I was very guarded, I've already spoken about, I was from a governance background.
Yeah.
So I was dealing with the press. I was dealing with, subjects that really you couldn't give too much information to. So that was my nature.
Mm.
But then I learned from that, it is okay to be emotive. It is also okay to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually helps me with my management technique.
Mm-hmm.
But the emotive bit, I in the end, I was quite nervous around even speaking out. When I first took over, I'd always been a leader, but I was never a leader that liked to be at the forefront of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So even public speaking to a certain extent was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But I got over that because when I started to talk emotively, I realised I was talking from the heart.
Yeah.
And actually, I loved the subject matter, and I understood the subject matter, and I wasn't trying to convince anybody of anything that I didn't really believe myself.
Sure.
So yeah, that was a big part for me, and it was a big thing I had to get over in the early stages. I like to think now, even though it's still today is nerve-wracking, sat here, but again from that course, I learned that nerves and excitement are very similar emotion. And I convinced myself, like I do at the start of a race, if I'm going to race now, I get tense, I think I'm nervous. Well, no, I'm not. I'm actually excited. I'm actually excited because I've done the process. I'm now going to see the outcome in 40 minutes time if I'm doing a 10K or whatever it is,
Sure.
So yeah,
Nice.
I see it as excitement now.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, thanks again for sharing. Yeah, lots of great stuff coming out here in terms of vulnerability and trust. I want to go back to that kind of right people around your piece as well. And I think you started to talk about this in terms of kind of trust and how they kind of challenge you and support you, I guess. What's kind of the key kind of aspect or dynamic with that in terms of, in other words, who are the right people, I suppose, for you to get the best out of yourself? Is it diversity of opinion? Is it being challenged? How does that kind of look for you?
I think both. I think diversity in opinion is absolutely vital. We're not always going to agree, and I don't want people that are just going to say, yes, Adam, that's fine, we'll get on with that. I want to be challenged on it. I want to then go away and reflect about what we've said. Ultimately, I know that I'm the sole decision maker, but I want people to feel part of that decision. I want to take people on the journey with us. I don't ever think it's how would I describe it? I don't want it to be a Caesar mentality in terms of that. I want everybody to feel part of it. And, there's something that thinking time again, we might have a meeting and we might discuss things, and I'll go away and I'll either go for a run, and then I'll phone somebody on the back end of that run and say, yeah, you were right. Let's go with this. Let's go with that. But you have to take people on the journey. You can't expect to be a dictator in modern leadership. I don't think that works. You need people around you that feel valued, that feel empowered. And I like to think that's what we do at Staffordshire FA, and I think that's a key. I know, we might get onto the culture a little bit later, but that is something that we try and instill from somebody's first day at Staffordshire, that they can have an opinion, that we want their opinion, and we regularly do it. So, and it might not just be my senior management team. I enjoy spending time with everybody and listening to everybody, and I think that everybody feels they have a say at Staffordshire FA.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Just to add to that as well, we had a board of directors. All our directors are volunteers.
Yeah.
We've made some governance changes over the last 4 to 5 years. We've recently achieved the FA's Code of Governance, which basically shows us as an equitable organisation that are doing things right in terms of our governance.
Yeah.
But what we've done, we've changed our setup, whereas before our board was made up of council members, which are volunteers from the game. We've now got independent members.
Sure.
So we've got some really, really impressive business people on our board. It would have been easier, and this is no disrespect to anybody, if we'd have stayed in the old school county FA where we've got people that just coming along and ticking, putting their hands up, etc., etc. We've really gone out and we now got some people to challenge, and they really do challenge, and that has really raised my game as CEO for the board. We'll all know locally as well, Matt Hancock is the CEO of Port Vale. He's the chair of our board of directors. We've got 3 or 4 CEOs on there from various, they've got interests in football obviously,
Sure.
but they're business people primarily. So Whereas before it might have been, we've got the softy approach to things. I am challenged, but I really do like that. It really gets the best out of me now.
Sure. Really good.
So that challenge throughout the organisation is really, really important to me.
Sure, that's cool. Tell us a little bit about how you might deal with setbacks. So I guess if something happened, adversity happened, how would you kind of try and process that? I guess we're probably getting a bit of a sense of how you might approach it, but I'd be curious to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we obviously it does happen, but I think you've got there's inevitability about that sort of thing, and I think once you understand that and your team understands that, it's how you review it and move on from it. What we cannot be and what we aren't at Staffordshire FA is a organisation that's scared of making mistakes. We encourage that again from day one. We want people to make decisions. I think that you should fear not making a decision rather than the actual decision itself. As long as you learn from it, and it's a real stereotype, but we look at failure as feedback. That's the way we would review it off the back of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to repeat that, and as I've already said, mistakes that we make can have such a big impact on people. It might not be a mistake that's going to cost somebody multi-million pounds, but it'd be a mistake that prevents a person that's been looking forward to their football all week from not having a game this weekend, for instance. And then that has the knock-on effect for everybody around that person. Or it might be a team, and then you think about the knock-on effect that you have from that, whether it's partners, whether it's spectators or anything like that. So we've made mistakes in the past, and I think if I was to give an example, it wasn't a mistake, but we were taking over a 21-acre site just before COVID, and it was Yarnfield. We were actually going to buy Yarnfield, and we were going to use it as well. We were going to have an office on there and put it as a hub.
Sure.
Unfortunately, things changed during COVID. We didn't need a 21-acre site coming out of it, and it always felt like a failure at the time that we couldn't get that over the line for the game within Staffordshire, because that's something we really want to achieve. We want Staffordshire because we want Staffordshire to be proud of a facility, and we were looking at a sort of mini St George's Park. Within our own, I'll say within our own county, within our area. But because of the circumstances with COVID, we had to pull away from that. And again, I don't think it was failure, but we learnt a lot from that, and that was a huge setback for us at Staffordshire FA. But now we're back. We are looking at other sites. We're actually working with a site in New Toxeton now, which the planning permission has gone in for. And whilst we won't be based there as an organisation, that will be a hub for football for East Staffs, and we're looking to do the same in other areas. But what we've done is we've learnt from that adversity that we went through when we were at Yarnfield. And we came away from. And at the time, it felt like the end of the world, as it does, things like that. We felt we'd let a lot of people down, but ourselves down as well. Although the circumstances, and again, if you look at, if we're looking at it, it's the controllables, isn't it? We couldn't control that.
Sure. And
when we recognise that, it's okay, we learn from it, we move on, and now we make something bigger and better. We see it as an opportunity.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for sharing that example. Yeah, and a great example. One final question from me on leadership before I hand back to you, Paul, if that's okay. There's lots of great things coming out of your conversation here in terms of leadership. I was interested in, are there any particular leaders that were kind of influential for you, or any kind of role models that you look up to, that you kind of met personally maybe, or maybe you kind of admired them from afar through the media?
I think I study leadership virtually every single day. I'm obsessed with reading about leadership, podcasts, audiobooks on the way in. So the way I set up my day is that when I drive into work, I have an hour commute. Effectively, that is learning on the way in, and on the way back, I'm chilling out. I'm listening to music. So I'm listening to some of my favourite music. But what I do read a lot, and it's always key, is leadership. And I wouldn't say that. I think there's so many that I just pick up snippets from, and there's the classics that Lincoln. If I was looking at people, Lincoln, Marcus Aurelius, because that fits in with the way that I think. And Shackleton are people that I would really look to, famous people that I would have thought real leaders. I can't get away from the fact that with me, my leadership and my first example of leadership is my PE teachers and my coaches. for me at school, everything was about sport, as you could probably imagine with the way I've gone with my career. But everything was about sport, and I learned so much, not just about the game as a youngster, but about how I should be and respect and morals around the game, or games, because it was other sports as well. But the same with my early coaches with my teams, and we had a wonderful evening at St George's Park a few weeks ago, whereby we were celebrating the volunteers, and we had the winners of our Volunteers Award for last season. And one of the things I said when I went up there was the impact that you can have as leaders, as volunteers, actually they don't realise the impact that our volunteers don't have. So it might not be that you have an impact next week to somebody who's been coaching you, and that somebody might come with grumpy next week. They might not be enjoying it. But we still have that situation where if I see my PE teachers now, I will have a chat to them and say, you did this for me. And that is some, I don't want to say, but some 30, 35 years down the line, the impact is immeasurable and can be going for them. So that sort of type of leadership has meant a lot, and I learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
Like I say, again, in terms of when I read, I think that Dave Brailsford and Clive Woodward are big for me because I absolutely believe in marginal gains. And I think for an organisation like ourselves, where resource is pretty sparse, that extra 5%, anything that we can do to get that extra 5%, it might be that, we've got to, little things like we have this within our culture, we have this thing where I keep talking about gratitude. So one of the things where our 5% that we try and get, not specific for that, is we do thank you cards. So I just put thank you cards, Staffordshire FA logo on the front, and I encourage the staff who's helped you today, what volunteer has helped you. Yeah. Just write to them. You'll never understand the impact that has on somebody when it drops through and they read that just from you in your handwriting. Just write it. And I think going back to that leadership, those are things that I've learned from that, is how can we improve with that little 5% that's not going to cost the world, that's not going to be taking loads of your time, but ultimately those 5% are everything. So I would say there's a mix, like I've just said. I think for me personally, it is going back to my roots. What I read about is what I've said there, but those two, and particularly Brailsford with what he did at British Cycling, really resonated with me, and I thought that's something we can actually bring into what we do.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. I mean, lots of great content in there. Again, I think the kind of gratitude acts and gratitude diary is something that's important to try and empower people to do, I think, for sure. And I think there's thinking about the long term and the impact. I think quite often people don't realise the weight of their behaviour and what they say and what they can do with people in terms of the impact that they can have on them. It's kind of exacerbated, I think, when they have got a leadership role, perhaps a formal leadership role as well. So, really interesting to hear your side of that story as well. So thank you.
Yeah, with that thank you card idea as well, it's not just the person who receives the card who benefits. And I think we can often forget that we can feel a nice glow and a benefit to our well-being and our performance if we give gratitude as well. Just another quick thing to reflect on before I move on. We've met a few times and we've never spoken about this, but you've just described my journey to and from work as well. Right. Because it's about an hour, which is a nice length for a podcast. So on the way, I always listen to something that I can learn from. Sometimes it's football related, sometimes it's psychology related. And on the way home, I'm exactly the same. I'm like, I've worked hard during the day now. I need to just give my brain a bit of space to think through things, to listen to some music, to turn the dial down so that when I walk through the door at home, I'm not still in work mode as well. So you've given some really fascinating insights, Adam, as to how you perform under pressure. And I guess the next part of the podcast now is how you help others to perform. And I think you've probably answered one of this question in one way already about the thank you cards. But can you give us some ideas as to how you help others that you work with to get the best out of them? So I'm thinking more here on a one-to-one level rather than culturally or group-wide, but perhaps people that you have a direct responsibility for, or maybe some of the volunteers that you come into contact with. How do you help to support their performance under pressure?
It's difficult because I know what you're saying individually, but I tend to take a similar approach what we do at Staffordshire FA is, as soon as you walk through the door, I want people to understand what we've talked about before, which is the purpose. And I think if you can understand what we are here for, at the end of the day, Staffordshire Football Association is here solely to support the grassroots game, which in the best part are volunteers. So the majority of volunteers. If you can buy into that, because we do actually recruit off that as well to make sure that we are, we recruit off our values. But for me, it's the understanding of the purpose first, because I want people to live by their purpose when they work for Staffordshire FA. You spend a lot of time working, obviously, and again, it's a stereotype. You spend a lot of time working, but it is so, we're in a fortunate position where we can do something that we love. We are involved in a game that we love, and we've got a true purpose to do. So firstly, I always want people to understand that that is what we're here for. That, again, going back to what we said earlier on, Staffordshire FA is a place where you can make mistakes, and I encourage you. One of the things that I really want people to do is we talked about a apprentice coming in next week, Libby, and she's starting with us, and I saw her the other day and she's really nervous, but I want her to come in and buy into that purpose. I want her to feel like she's comfortable in making decisions off her own back. I want her to feel that it's a safe environment for her. So I do think, and I know what you're saying about not being culture, but I do think that is everything for me. We do pieces as well, and we talk about our company values, which everybody has, which everybody puts into, and it is relevant for this, because what we tend to do, we had 2 new starters last week, and when you walk into our offices now, we've got something on the wall. I don't believe in corporate. I just don't think it reflects what we do. I want people to understand that they're going to a different environment when they come to us. And basically what it says on the wall is not our purpose, because we have a purpose separate to it, but what it says, we did a recent survey where we were looking to get feedback for our strategy. And we got feedback from grassroots people. And there was one response, there was a load of response that resonated, but this really did resonate to me. Now, I'm not going to quote it word for word because it's long, but it's basically, grassroots place is me, it's where I am, this is what my week is about. It's up on the wall. So when we have new starters now, I stop them on the stairs and I'll say, look, this is what we're here for. This is what we do. Yeah. And then behind them, we have to the other side is our values, or our values. Now, we do something different with our values. And again, this is, I think, key to helping people to perform better, because our values, we've changed. So through all the reading I've done, I thought I had an idea which the team brought into. I wanted to change our values from dead nouns into active verbs. So we basically explain in a value what, I say, if we go with those values, we will achieve what that person wants us to do. So it's basically making decisions, being not fearful to make decisions on behalf of Staffordshire football, but taking responsibility for our actions and outcomes. That is one of our values that's up on there, encouraging people to be courageous and make decisions. These are all key things that I want to embed with people, but I think then when they're performing under pressure will help them. Before we talk about values, and probably values is the second one that I got to, but we talk about values and we talk about corporate companies. I don't believe in, say, respectful being I'm not knocking any company that may have come up with their values, but respectful to me, what does that mean to an apprentice that's going to come and join us on Monday morning? Well, I thought I was respectful, or honesty. I thought I was honest. I haven't stolen anything, but what does honesty mean for this business? And that's where we've tried to turn them into active verbs and be, I know now if we're open-minded and courageous when we're making our decisions, that brings in innovation that we might just have used as a word as innovation. Yeah. So it is absolutely key, Paul, that we buy into that, but we don't just do that. We try and make it so that we do. We talk about personal values as well, and we align that, personal goals. Yeah. We encourage people to come up with we go through sessions and align their company goals to our company goals and their personal goals. We do a lot of work around it. I know you're saying to try and avoid culture, But I do believe that it's everything for that, because that then, when they are under pressure, they know that the company's got their back. They know that they're acting in line with what we as a group have agreed in terms of our values. And I think, and I always say, what does your subconscious feel? What's your gut feel? And 9 times out of 10, it aligns to those values that they've agreed, that we've put in place, that we actually work by. So I think that gives people the confidence to make decisions, to actually work under pressure.
I think you've given some really practical and usable strategies here that people who are listening, who work in any business, whether they're working a football academy, whether they work in a vet, a dental practice, in a school, all of these approaches to and I'll give the explicit example here, changing dead nouns to active verbs is something that people can start to implement tomorrow in their job. Just as a follow-up question, I was going to ask you a little bit about culture, but I think you've probably covered that in a lot of detail already. How often would you go about reviewing some of those active verbs, and is it a process where I think you've already kind of answered this a little bit, but it's a collective process, right, for you to do that? Yeah.
We did it over a year process. So we did a number of sessions, which I learned from the mindset training that I was on before. So we talked about various personal values was one session we did on it. We do it in team meetings, and I tend to deliver on that. So we did it over a long period of time, knowing that it would align with our new strategy that was going to be released for this season. So it was aligned to that. However, these sessions don't just stop because we're into a strategy cycle. If we feel that actually one of those we could tweak or we could change, we would do it, but under full agreement of the team, not me or the senior management team telling us that it's going to the way it's going to be. It's got to be buy-in from everybody, and I think that is so key. And you do have changeover of staff, so those are things you need to consider as well. You know, those people that are coming in now, well, actually, they haven't been part of that process. They probably agree with it, and probably because we recruit using those values, they probably align to them. And that doesn't mean to say, you know, it's really important that we get diversity of opinions. It doesn't mean to say we want everybody thinking exactly the same. It's not that. It's how you make decisions. It's not what decisions you make. It's about how you think about things. It's not about what you're thinking. So I want diversity of opinions. I just think, or we think, that by aligning them with those values, we will come to not always the right decision, but we will get as close as we can to that right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. It's making so much sense to me. A quick follow-up question as well regarding recruitment, because you mentioned in your answer a while back that people's values play a huge role in terms of deciding, are they the right person for us? This came up on the podcast just before Christmas, actually, last year, where we had 2 Walsall strikers in the studio together, and they were talking about their boss, Matt Sadler, and it was a real key part of the players that he signed in the summer, that it was character first, and a playing ability still matters, of course, but it's not ever at the sacrifice of characteristics. So my question to you really is, we know that it's important for you, but how do you go about assessing that? How do you work out if somebody has the correct, maybe correct's not the right word, but the congruent characteristics that are going to fit in with Staffordshire FA?
Okay, so it's completely aligned to those values and the purpose. We obviously do the shortlisting off that. I don't want to go into too much detail without this, because we are just about to recruit, so somebody's going to get head start if they listen to this. No, but I am in total agreement, and I used to say until probably 18 months ago that we look at 75% character, 25% skill set. But we've changed that now. I'm up to 95% character, 5% skill set, because I genuinely believe if you get the right person and pointed through those values, you can teach those skills if you've got the right characteristics. It is so important for us. We deal with volunteers on a daily basis. For me, one of the things that I like to have is, I think if you want to understand how a volunteer works, you have to be a volunteer yourself. So that is key for me. I like to see how is this person, you know, and particularly when we talk about university students as well, when we're coming out into the work market. One of the key things for me, I'm looking for voluntary experience straight away. I need that because I think that if they're going to speak on the phone and it could be sometimes an irate volunteer, but how do we empathise?
Yeah.
How do we put ourselves in that person's shoes at that time? And, I think through what we do with our values and the way we think, because the SMT and I know the whole of our team think like that, that we're talking about empathy. And whilst I said we don't like just using words, that's through our values, but that is understood because that is a key component of what we do. So I'm looking for empathy as a massive part in terms of that characteristic. It's got to be a person that understands that. Not giving up your time. I don't like that word for a volunteer. I think it's sharing your time with other people because it's valuable time. When we say giving up, it almost looks like it's a negative, and it's not. But people have to understand that, and that is a key. That is the key element for us when we appoint.
Yeah, that's an interesting turn of phrase there. Not giving up your time, but sharing your time. I really like that. Yeah. The topic empathy comes up time and again on this podcast, and I probably didn't realise actually just how important it was in this domain of performing under pressure. But the more I record these episodes, the more I see that actually it's central to it all.
Just on that, Paul, we some of our staff recently attended some training by the Football Association, because obviously the Football Association are our key funders and we have a relationship with them we deliver on a local level. And I was a bit sceptical of this, and I'm probably not going to be as positive about this but the FA brought in empathy training. And it was a 2-day session where people learnt empathy. Mm-hmm. I was sceptical that you can actually learn the skill of empathy within 2 days. You could probably gain a bit of awareness, but to come away from that thinking you're fully trained in empathy, I think is a little bit naive. Hence, going back to the roots of somebody, I think before they get to Staffordshire FA, I want to see that. It's not something that I think we would necessarily want to say, well, this is what you need to do. We're going to teach you empathy. Mm-hmm. I think that we need to see that in a character before they come to us, because then they need to hit the ground running with those. And they would believe me, some of the people that are involved in Staffordshire, great people, they would spot that straight away.
Yeah.
And that's from my experience of sort of getting to the bottom of, appointing now for X amount of years as a CEO, that is what we need in Staffordshire to service the game in Staffordshire. That's the type of person I believe, with diversity of opinions and ideas, that's what we need to get there to serve the game.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that you've shared. The next part of the podcast moves on to more specifically what Staffordshire FA are doing at the moment. And I think this is important because, first of all, we are the University of Staffordshire podcast, and we're very proud to showcase local athletes, local business people, local teachers who are doing fantastic work. And now is the time to shine the spotlight on the excellent work that's going on at Staffordshire FA. So at the back end of 2024, there was a new initiative launched, which was called Supporting Staffordshire Football to Enhance Our Communities. And I just wonder if you could kind of bring that to life for our listeners, please. Yeah,
that's our 4-year strategy that we released in October in line with the Football Association's grassroots strategy. So the FA's grassroots strategy comes out as the national picture, but what we feel is really important for Staffordshire is we've got something bespoke for Staffordshire people. It's something that I know our team are really keen on, is that identity for Staffordshire. The localism is essential. So it was an option to just completely adopt the FA's grassroots strategy. However, what we've done is we've incorporated that into our own. So it was a year-long consultation process with all of our stakeholders, all the people, everybody had opportunity to feed back in. And there's some key themes that have come from it, which you'd expect. And I'll always remain positive. Facilities was one, which was up there, top of the list. Behaviours, positive and negative. There was a lot of discussion about it. They were the top two that really resonated for us. So, we'd been going for that consultation. It is our duty to act upon that now and write that into a plan. I'm really excited about this plan, and I know any CEO would say that about any strategy, but this is I think the difference with what we do is that we genuinely do not put our plan, our strategy on a shelf and it gathers dust. We've tried for the last 3 strategies now, whilst we've aligned it to Staffordshire. So we started with untying the knot, was the first strategy that we did, and that was about breaking down any barriers for anybody to get involved with our organisation, for us to actually get out there, and you understand that we're not a closed county FA, which has been a perception in the past. We're not just there to take money off people. In fact, the very opposite. We're there to invest in the game. We then followed that up with Uniting the Knot, which I felt had a real impact as well. And I think we're closer now to Staffordshire football than we've ever been. I think our relationships are better because as a governing body, there are always, like I said before, there's always perceptions. Ultimately, if your only experience of Staffordshire FA is paying a fine, then you're probably not going to have the best experience. But what we do with that 5%, as I mentioned to earlier on, is if somebody does pay a fine, I want them to have the best possible experience, and I want them to understand that that is a safety valve for the game. That is actually helping with behaviours, and that money is then reinvested back into the game for us to develop the game. So United, we built those relationships. So this is a strategy that now leads on from that. And the key themes through it for us are the community. We need to there are still people within Staffordshire that do not feel comfortable or do not have the opportunities to play football as other people would. And we need to break down those barriers. That needs to be the first thing that we do. Key through is leadership, responsibility and accountability. And again, that aligns to the behaviours. But it's a 4-year strategy, and we have really given ourselves things to be accountable for as well. We've made promises in there. You've probably read it yourself after I sent it to you, but you've probably read it yourself. I like to make us accountable. I think we need to be accountable as a governing body. If we're expecting clubs to be accountable and responsible, we have to be exactly the same. And I think that aligns to what I've said before. So we've given ourselves a number of challenges around behaviours, facilities particular, but also the continuous growth. We'll probably talk about it in a little while, but the growth of the female game as well. But this is a plan for Staffordshire that we want everybody to feel part of, to feel that they've had some say in, and I think that it is, and it's. I'll go back to it. We have a unique identity in Staffordshire, and we sometimes feel that we're forgotten about. Staffordshire FA, I think Staffordshire as a county, we feel forgotten about at times. And I think actually what we've got so far from that release of that strategy is we're being noticed a little bit. And it's a real strange one that we are forgotten about because we've got St George's within our county. And I think people forget where that actually is in Staffordshire.
I agree.
But yeah, I think, we've had various people want to talk to us about our strategy. I think it's been well received nationally as well as hopefully, I'm sure people will tell me, but hopefully locally as well. But that is our commitment to Staffordshire football over the next 4 years.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds like a great example of identity leadership. I'm listening to this thinking this is amazing. You've taken something that's right for you, created something and evolved it with your team and developed something that's... it's for us and we. Yeah, you're using those collective terms. That's really coming through in what you've done.
Yeah, and you'll notice through the branding now. We've done a lot of work with the branding. It is a Staffordshire skyline that you see, and I don't think that's replicated. There's 50 county FAs, and I don't think a lot of them do that identity piece as much or as well as what we do. And I'm really keen that if people are reading something, that their eyes are being drawn to, that we've got the Staffordshire skyline with everything that we think is a landmark within Staffordshire, including little things that you spot when you go the second time around, like a horse for the Uttoxeter races, for instance. But it's all things that resonate with people within Staffordshire, and that is really, really important for us because there would be no point in us writing a bland, standard national, in my opinion, national plan that people can't resonate with. They've got to resonate. You might see a picture of somebody you played football against, or it might even be you or it's Spectator, that you can just recognise, and that's what we try to do throughout our branding now. We are only there, as I keep repeating, we are only in existence for these people, for us to serve the game.
Sure. Yeah, amazing. And I guess there's a couple of key things in terms of the women's game that you alluded to, parenting and referees as key kind of parts of where you want to go. I guess we hear quite a lot of issues with parent behaviour, for example, on sidelines and these sort of things. Is that a point that you want to try and make a difference in? Do you think you can make a difference and influence that?
Yeah, and I think I'll always start by this. The key thing to remember is it's it's a tiny minority. It's less than 5% where you will actually see misconduct if you were to go out and, like I said, there's 30,000 players playing the game. There's nearly 2,500 teams now. So when you put it in perspective, it's a minority. However, we are a game, and this is a real bonus for us. We're a game that is basically a mirror of society, and we have to take that into account. But what we can't settle for is to allow that to happen on our doorstep. So we recognise that behaviours, poor behaviours will happen. What we are trying to do, we're doing a number of initiatives because, as I said, if it's top of the things that people want to talk about within Staffordshire, we have to invest into it.
Sure.
We ultimately have the regulatory side of things, which is, as I've said before, a safety valve. So I know when I played football, I wasn't going to play football if there wasn't a discipline process in place, because it's that protection for you. Now, that is the ultimate retrospective answer. But I think we want to be more proactive about that. I think we need to concentrate more on positive behaviours. I think we need to look at role models. We're currently doing a pilot with one of our leagues where we're looking at positivity league tables, where based on behaviours.
Yeah.
With the premise that ultimately you're told at the start of this, if your behaviour is at a certain level, then the league could actually vote you out, or the members could vote you out. But for me, the emphasis is on the positivity with this.
Sure. Yeah.
We feel that, within this pilot as well, we think, and I've mentioned it a few times and it's going through our strategy, we think that leadership, responsibility and accountability is absolutely important for behaviours. And I think I spoke to Paul before about this, but this as an example where we may have two clubs who are from exactly the same area, and one club might have impeccable behaviour, the other club's behaviours might not be, let's just say. Now, how in the same area, when one might be saying, well, actually, we get people that, it's a little bit more difficult for them and the behaviours we're taking that. Well, actually, how is that different? And I think it's purely down to leadership. I think that there is a real key piece for us here to say, right, okay, what is happening different in this club that's making the behaviours? We're not tolerating those lines? What's happening here? Are we just using excuses because excuses aren't good enough? And ultimately, we want the chairs or the leaders of these clubs to actually take a bit of pride and responsibility in that. And I'm sure they do, but we need to talk to them about it, and we need to talk about at the end of the day, everybody's volunteers. It is a difficult subject to deal with. It's a difficult thing to take on yourself, but we need to be there to support, to help people to do that. In further, moving on from that as well, I think as part of this pilot that we need to look more deeply at behaviours. So if there are negative behaviours, or even positive behaviours, we need to understand, but we need to get underneath. And I think what we've done as football for too long now is just paper over the cracks, and we put out campaigns and we say, please behave like this, don't behave like that. How many people actually, how they taken that in? For me, when you walk into a football area, what makes you think, in worst case scenario, that you can behave the way that you do? Is that sort of pantomime behaviour? Is it learnt behaviour? Is there a trigger? And I think when we're talking about the psychological aspects of it, I think we dig much, much deeper than just paper in the cracks. We need to understand that when somebody goes to a game, what is the trigger for me then to say something to the referee who might be 16 years old that he would never or she would never do walking down the street normally? Is that accepted behaviour? Is it learnt? I don't know, but I think we need to get to the bottom of it. I know that I've had experiences where I've turned up to events and I got a cap on and I go undercover because I don't want people to suddenly, but I just have I like getting a feel for how things are going. And I've been on a beautiful summer day and the behaviour is absolutely impeccable, lovely, everybody's clapping, everybody. You go on a rainy day, and that might be, I'm not saying this happens every time, but it might be a little bit different. Again, is that something else? It could be down to that. I'm cold, I'm not very happy, I've had a bad week or whatever. Yeah. We need to understand more about it before we can start making real inroads into everybody turning up to a game of football and not feeling worried about the behaviour. And like I say, and I'll always say it's a minority. It doesn't happen as often as it won't. But I think what is good now is when it does happen, it's more noticeable. and more people are reporting it. And again, we go back to what we're trying to do there. It's particularly discrimination. That has shot up over recent years. But I don't think we can actually say that's down to more discrimination at the moment. I think it's probably down to, as well, that people are more comfortable reporting it to us, which is a really good thing. So there are all aspects around this. But I do think, going back to the point which I labour on, I know Paul knows I do this, but we need to get underneath. We need to understand more before we can start putting remedies in action.
Sure. And you mentioned referees there in terms of your answer. Is there something you're doing or trying to do with the referees to help them deal with the demands? I mean, refereeing's it's a bit of a big question, I think, for the nation, isn't it, in football, in terms of the popularity of people wanting to go into refereeing. But is that an area of focus as well? I don't know whether you find it surprising or not, but we are never, ever short of people wanting to referee. We are set targets by the Football Association, but we set our own targets because we feel that's how many referees we need to service the game. So that everybody's got a qualified referee, because that's got to be our aim. So last year, for the first time ever, Staffordshire surpassed 1,000 qualified referees, which is, in context, is brilliant. Yeah, amazing.
However, the work then starts in the retention. When people do have a bad experience, which again is not that often, but if they do have a bad experience, what happens then? Are we there to support? Which I think we are. We've got a designated member of staff who does that, or a couple of designated members of staff who will support referees. We also have got volunteers out there, coaches, referee coaches, referee mentors, that provide that support. It is a lonely place being a referee. It really is, and wherever possible we want to get support with them. So centre football helps with that. So when everybody comes and plays at the same centre on the morning, the league are hosting it, we've usually got somebody there from the league. The league can then speak to the referee. It feels like it's when you start getting to the older age groups, when you're out in a field between two teams. We do a lot of training with early when referees when they first pass, because quite often they're quite young. You only have to be 14 to be a qualified referee, and quite a few referees do take that up because it is quite lucrative for them. For a young person to do that and have a part-time job, it's probably better than doing a paper round, as in my generation. That's what I'm talking about. But
remember those days?
But ultimately, we need to support those young referees. And one of the other aspects we do there as well, and what we try to do wherever possible, is we put them into a protective environment to start with. So Stoke City Academy and Port Vale Academy are really helpful with that. So we will put younger referees into that environment, so that you've got the behaviours will be absolutely spot on in academies. But then it's about their graduation away from that and how we then support referees from that. We put on more and more CPD, but we need to get more referees to get to that training. And I know something through the pilot that we're talking with Staffs Uni that. And I really want to do something with this is, can we look at doing some sort of, I don't want to say, but some sort of trauma training, using the facilities that we've got here. Can we get referees in to do, some training along those lines about how to deal with those situations? Because for most young lads or girls, it is going to be a totally new thing when you are suddenly shouted at from the side of the pitch that your decision wasn't correct. And that is a situation which they probably haven't dealt with before. And we need to understand, A, they're young people, and B, they're human beings. And just being shouted at like that doesn't tend to happen in your general life.
No.
And whilst for certain generations it might feel like we go back to the pantomime behaviour, that's fine to do that. It really isn't. And, we do something as well where all of our under 18 referees wear yellow armbands. Because we want people to see that actually, and somebody else will bring it up, actually that person's under 18, you're shouting at a child. And it's those sort of things. But we do as we do quite a lot of development as they go through the higher ranches of referees. It tends to be more training from the Football Association, so we bring her through the grassroots referees, but we still have touch with those referees. So some of those senior referees might come back and help us to act as role models with the younger referees as well.
Great.
So there are plenty of things in place. It's just making sure that we're pitching that right. And I think that we could improve it. And I think with our relationship with the university, I think we could definitely improve it. I think we could going back to the previous point, I think we could improve it by understanding the behaviours, but also putting people in a position where they can better handle those behaviours as well.
Kind of attacking the issue from both sides there, isn't it? Simulation training, get them used to dealing with those situations in terms of the individuals themselves, the referees, but also trying to modify the behaviours.
And I think that's another misconception with us as well. And whilst I don't want to, as CEO, talking about finance is pretty boring, but ultimately we're not we're a not-for-profit organisation, and people think that we're trying to hoard something when we bring in these fines. But what categorically I will say is that money is used then to reinvest into support around referees, or we've got a safeguard and a respect officer who is proactively going out there and leading these pilots to try and improve the behaviours. So what we do is it's quite ironic really, but you're using the money that's brought in from poor behaviours to turn into good behaviours. So that is for me how a not-for-profit organisation should work, by reinvesting back into the game.
Yeah, perfect. And also the women's game, I guess it plans to continue to kind of grow that. I guess it's an area that we're doing amazing on a national level.
We're doing a lot around the female game. One of the key elements of the grassroots strategy, the FA's grassroots strategy, is to equal opportunities for the female game. We have our own, of course we do, because we're Staffordshire. But we've got our own overseeing of that. We have got Level in the Score. We call it Level in the Score. We've branded it, and basically all of our female development comes under that. Now, we can't get away from the fact that we've still not got it right in terms of primary schools and girls playing football. I've got 2 daughters that are now adults, but I often thought the reason they didn't play football was because of what I did, because they tried every single other sport. It's going to take them play cricket, gymnastics, everything else. I was driving around taking them. I was thinking, I'm not going to force football on them because it might be because of me. Having spoke to them, my eldest is actually a teacher now, and quite right, she's done the full circle with this, but she says it's just there weren't opportunities, and we were a bit embarrassed we would have had to play with boys or around boys, and that was a rural environment, so that's still going to be taking place. We need to do more with that. Now my daughter, ironically, now sets up her own classes where she's doing football training, in a rural environment, which is great, but she's still not getting the support that she needs. And I think for us, a lot of the work that we need to do is encouraging those club school links, where if they are showing signs of playing the game in school, then they've been taken out and played, getting into a club early on. But likewise, club coaches are going in and taking off that role for under-resourced, because they're going to be under-resourced in schools. So you're probably not, in a rural environment particularly, you're probably not going to get a teacher that's going to take on the girls' sides.
Sure.
But if we can get those club schools links going, then that can only improve on that. What we're trying to do as well is, at the other end of the game, is that we have, and I'm of this age as well, of the lost generation. And a key piece of work we've done over the last 5 years, it was Mum's Play, where it was over 30s women that were getting back into the game in a recreational environment. That is, I literally, I know I talked about being emotive earlier on. I think that's something where I've stood on the side of the pitch and I've been in tears, because I'm from that generation where we used to have some brilliant girls players when I was in my primary school team, and then when we moved up to secondary school, they were simply told, no, you can't play anymore. And how can that be right in the modern environment? But seeing those women now have an opportunity to fulfill their football experience is just wonderful. And that's something we will be investing into as well, along those lines, as well as supporting the Staffordshire Girls and Ladies League as well, who provide the participation opportunities. They've got a hell of a lot of teams playing in there now, and I think that's going to continue to grow for the next 4 years. What we do have to consider as well, though, that does bring other issues into play, i.e. what we talked about earlier on, facilities. Have we got enough facilities for all of the new teams that are coming to play? And I think a real key one for me as well is female-friendly facilities. Unfortunately, and this is from no intention of anybody, there's still a negative bias towards males and football facilities, whereas not even having sanitary facilities when you go in and being able to use a toilet is not right, and that will put somebody off from playing the game, and we need to make sure that that's not the case. That's something that's written to our strategy as well, about working with clubs and leagues to make sure that's the case.
Yeah, another great example of how you serve in Staffordshire football, I think. Yeah, and
we're still nowhere near where we can be with growth of the female game. Like I say, there are still so many more people that could get involved, and that's our intention through. We've got Danny, our officer, who leads on the female pathway, and that's her sole role.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to hear about the great work that's going on at Staffordshire FA. You mentioned the knot a few times, and I'm just looking at my microphone actually, and the Staffordshire knot is on that. So for people who are not from the county, or for some of our international listeners, the knot is part of the county's logo and emblem. And actually, if you look closely at the numerous tattoos that Robbie Williams has got, Robbie Williams is from Burslem, I think, which is part of Stoke-on-Trent. He's got the Staffordshire knot tattooed, I think, on his wrist, on his arm. So we're at the stage of the podcast now where we're going to recap. If it's okay with you, Matt, I'll jump in first, allow you to gather your thoughts.
Sounds good.
And then we'll get Adam's final reflections today. It's been a fascinating episode. So, sport for choice as usual, but I'll go with something practical first. So, as a CEO, decision making is integral to your job. You have to make decisions under pressure because you have a responsibility to people. And what you said about that was, sometimes I just need to slow the process down. I need time. Deliberate time, I think, was the phrase you used. And that can happen on a walk, a run, a drive. So if we need to perform under pressure, sometimes we can charge in with 2 feet, jump in with 2 feet, and rush the decision and therefore maybe not come to the correct decision. And what you're saying is give yourself a bit of thinking space and make that deliberate. So I like that. Thank you for sharing that. I like what you were saying as well about being vulnerable as a leader, not being afraid to show your true and authentic self, because when you do, it's going to increase probably feelings of togetherness amongst the team. This is just not a robotic leader that's preaching from some FA guidelines here. This leader really cares, and therefore I can feel connected to that leader. So I really like that, and that's a great message to give as a leader. Drip feeds into the rest of the team, I imagine. My final point was about your recruitment for how you bring new people into the organisation. And you gave the numbers there that you recruit 95% based on character and 5% on skill, which I guess just underlines the crucial role of psychology in day-to-day performance, as well as what we might term clutch performance as well. So, yeah, those are my 3 things, Matt, and I'll hand over to you. What stood out for you?
Lots. Yeah, thanks very much. Really grateful for your time and your insights. I found it a really... I think one of your strengths is reflection. I found it a really reflective episode in terms of being able to reflect back, not just on the 24 years at Staffordshire FA, but like the explicit things that you've been doing really proactively to change behaviours. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that's kind of the first point, really, that we've all got an opportunity in terms of our behaviours to be proactive and help people make a difference. And it sounds like you're doing a great job of that within Staffordshire FA. You took my togetherness piece there, Paul. I think had that down, but so good. I love the bit on higher purpose.
Yeah,
I think kind of having a purpose, in a business world, a purpose beyond profit, and that's maybe not as relevant for you guys given your focus, but having that higher purpose. Yeah, what am I coming in to do today, and what does that drive us towards? And really get a sense that you do a great job of that in terms of the Staffordshire FA. I loved how you talked about, on the walls we've got motto, mission, values, and you would talk to people about that. Those real practical things reminds me of people getting their first cap when they represent the country for the first time. I think those practical, memorable things are really profound and things that people remember. And I think it links into the gratitude piece as well, pretty well. I kind of love the idea that, you're happy for people to make mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes and go out there and be creative, have freedom. And if that means we make a mistake, that's okay. We can kind of reflect on it, learn from it and move forward. And how that must give a real injection of confidence for your team is kind of immeasurable, I think, from my reflection, my perspective. Talked about Marcus Aurelius as well, so that was cool.
Martin Turner will be happy.
Yeah, Martin will be very happy about that. Yeah, some more books we can recommend for you as well, I think, on that. And I think, final point around having things away from football. Whilst football is everything, it's also to give everything to football. It sounds like you have other identities within your life that are really important, that allow you to recover and rest and recuperate, which mean that when you step back into football, it's getting all of you, and that's going to be great for everybody. But yeah, really grateful for your time and insights. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Excellent. So, final opportunity, really. Adam, any reflections on what we just picked out there, or any other closing comments that you'd like to add?
No, it was nice to hear, actually.
Good.
It's all right. I think, look, just from my point of view, I think, if you'd have said to me when I was a kid playing football non-stop, like up the local park and watching games on TV and just being obsessed with the game, absolutely obsessed I was. If I could have seen myself being given this opportunity, I just wouldn't have believed it. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities that Staffordshire football have given to me. And that's why I think, when I talk about the higher purpose, that's what, I know it's my job, but you want to give that back too. So I think for me, it's just, I'm like, I'm really, really proud to do what I do. And hopefully that's come across today.
Absolutely has. Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned pride there. I live in Staffordshire. My daughter plays for a team in Staffordshire. We work for the University of Staffordshire, and we can certainly feel a sense of pride, I think, from listening to you today, that Staffordshire FA are doing some fantastic things, and they're led in such a person-centred, psychologically informed way. And I think our listeners have got loads of things that they can take from today. So just to wrap up, really, let's finish off with some thank yous. So first of all, thank you for your time today, Adam. It's been a pleasure to sit down and listen to your thoughts on this.
No problem.
Thank you to my co-host, Professor Matt Slater. Thank you for your inputs as well, Matt.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you to our technical support team for all that you do to edit this and to get this out for us. And lastly, thank you to our loyal listeners and to our new listeners as well. We love interacting with you. We love to hear your feedback. So please keep those comments coming. So until the next time, that's it for today on the University of Staffordshire's Performing Under Pressure podcast.